If you used to ask me what is my favorite racetrack on the current NASCAR schedule, it's usually a toss-up between Martinsville and Darlington. Two very historic tracks that have always been on the NASCAR schedule, even though they were both in jeopardy of being off the schedule at one point. My favorite track of all time is not on the current NASCAR schedule. As a matter of fact, it hasn't been on the Cup Series schedule in 20 years. I'll talk more about that track shortly. Entering the 21st century, NASCAR was becoming a major force in America, which meant that they were going to hit up as many big markets as possible. This is why you saw so many tracks being built in the late 90s and early 2000s like Texas Motor Speedway, Chicagoland, Kansas, Homestead, and Las Vegas. These tracks were built to hold up to near or over 100,000 people. Most tracks that have already been on the NASCAR schedule for years underwent renovations. Unfortunately, the before mentioned Darlington and Martinsville weren't doing the same. If you wasn't holding at least 100,000 people around NASCAR's boom period, then it was going to be difficult to hold a place on the schedule. It was pretty clear that NASCAR was getting away from their roots as they left North Wilkesboro in the mid-90s, and now here they are thinking about leaving Darlington and Martinsville. Thankfully, these tracks still remain on the schedule to this day. ISC bought Martinsville in 2004, and you could say that it helped the track remain on the schedule, at least in this case. But just because a big corporation like SMI or ISC ends up purchasing a racetrack doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to stay on the schedule. Then you look at Darlington, which was in a very similar situation to Martinsville. Darlington was actually going to one race after 2003, but I guess you could say that one of the most legendary finishes that took place at that racetrack in the spring of 2003 saved it from being removed from the schedule completely. As a matter of fact, the following year, a multi-million-dollar deal was signed with Darlington to have upgrades done to the track. Part of the upgrades was the installation of stadium lights. Here we are years later and the lady in black lives on. The same can't be said for my favorite racetrack, a track that I absolutely adore, and that's Rockingham Speedway. Cup cars have been vacant from the speedway since 2004. Last time a NASCAR race has taken place there was 2013 when the Truck Series raced at the facility. After that, the track has been inactive, and it feels so wrong because the racetrack is absolutely fantastic. It's no other racetrack like Rockingham. Race cars are pretty much racing on a cheese grater that's a little over a mile with 22 degrees of banking in turns 1 and 2, while turns 3 and 4 has 25 degrees of banking. Coming off these steep corners on the surface that chews tires up presents a huge challenge for the drivers, especially with the speeds they're carrying going into the turns, which is close to 180 miles per hour, which is really fast for a track that's a little over a mile. Fast speeds and lack of grip means it's going to be tough to hang on throughout the run. So with that, this is when the driver decides on how they want to attack this racetrack, and there's many ways of doing so. This is truly a multi-groove track. You can run low, middle, and high and make speed in each of these lanes. The entry into turn 1 in Rockingham is pretty unique because the trioval kinda straightens out right before you enter the corner. When you go back and watch races at Rockingham, something you'll see from some drivers is that they'll put their left side tires just a little bit below that white line going into turn 1, which is an approach that led to some drivers having success at Rockingham. And if I had to think of a driver that was the best with that approach, it was Kyle Petty. Then there's running up the racetrack and ripping the boards. When you see drivers running the high lane at Rockingham, you usually see their car into the corner kinda in the middle, and then they'll let the car climb up the racetrack and then power off the corner. It's so fun to watch. 10 laps into a run, you already got drivers complaining about lack of grip, and it's only going to get worse as the run goes on. By the end of a fuel run, the pace drops off over 2 seconds, and with the pace dropping off that much, it creates comers and goers. And yeah, this happens at other racetracks like Darlington, Homestead, and Atlanta before they turn it into a super speedway, but at Rockingham it's more fun to watch because there's no dominant lane even when the tires get old. Every lane on the long run can still be fast, and this is why the racing at this track is so damn good. This track has produced so many great battles for the win. Bobby Hamilton versus Dale Earnhardt Sr. in 1996, trading the lead back and forth with not many laps left. Hamilton's leading going into turn 3, but Dale Earnhardt being Dale Earnhardt bumps Hamilton out of the way coming off of 4. Tony Stewart versus Matt Kenseth in the Busch Series in 1998. Two future Hall of Famers trying to make a name for themselves, giving it their all as it would be Kenseth who will come out on top. Ward Burton's late race charge to catch his brother Jeff, but just coming up short. In 2001, Steve Park driving a DEI car trying to bring it home after losing his car owner just the week prior, but he got Bobby Labonte who was making a late race charge, but it would be Steve Park just barely holding on for the win. The fall race of 2002 has Johnny Benson who was looking for his first career win, but has so many challenges he's facing. He might not make it on fuel, the handling is going away lap after lap, and then He got Mark Martin, a heavy favorite for the 2002 championship, who was also wrestling with his race car right behind him. Johnny Benson, the underdog, would end up holding off a hard-charging Mark Martin for his first career win. 2003 would be young versus old, Kurt Busch versus Dale Jarrett, as both of them are having to navigate a ton of lap traffic. Dale Jarrett ended up pouncing on Kurt Busch and scoring the win. Just many great battles at this racetrack. Come on now, y'all really thought I was gonna forget to mention the closest finish at Rockingham Speedway? Hell no. Unfortunately, this is when things started to become doom and gloom for Rockingham. Going into 2004, Rockingham was going to only have one date, and there was rumors that it was going to be completely off the schedule in 2005. Around this time, you was hoping that things would change and they'll be able to keep this track on the schedule for the foreseeable future. Who knows, maybe a banger of a finish can save the racetrack. Well, one of those things came to fruition. The Cup Series final race at Rockingham featured a close finish between Matt Kenseth and Kasey Kahne. Kenseth coming off a, I guess you could say, controversial championship because he only won one race en route to that championship. Then here's this young rookie that replaced Bill Elliott in the Effingham 9 car, Kasey Kahne, already challenging for his first career win and only his second career Cup start. Then you got Jamie McMurray lurking right there in third. Kahne tried so many laps to work over Kenseth, but Kenseth wasn't making a mistake. Kasey gave it one last big effort and actually got side by side with Kenseth coming to the line, but just came up short. Kenseth would end up being victorious. So here's a great finish that just took place at the Rock. It actually was the closest finish that happened in the 2004 Cup season, and you're hoping that it's Darlington all over again, but it didn't turn out that way. Rockingham will be axed off the Cup schedule after 2004. Why? Because believe it or not, the track was having attendance issues. While other racetracks were easily selling out, Rockingham couldn't even sell out the 60,000 seats they sold. So even with the racing product delivering at the Rock, people weren't showing up like how they were at other racetracks. So this begs the next question of why wasn't fans showing up to Rockingham? The track wasn't making any investments in updating the facility. Everything was outdated and just didn't have what other racetracks were providing to the fans. So basically, the fan experience wasn't the greatest. The track was ran by LG DeWitt all the way until 1997, and then Roger Penske purchased the track. Okay, so with that, you will assume the track will be in good hands. Roger Penske didn't own Rockingham for that long though, as it was then sold to ISC in 1999. So here's a really huge corporation that owns the track now, and they never invested in upgrading the place. No efforts at all. Then out of nowhere, they sold the Speedway to SMI, but it didn't matter because Speedway Motors announced that no races would be held at the Rock. So then what happened after that? SMI put the track up for auction in 2007. It's so frustrating knowing that Rockingham was under ISC and SMI at one point and yet nothing came from it. A lot of tracks owned by ISC and SMI were given second dates while Rockingham was left to the wayside. Obviously, with these two huge corporations, money was far from an issue, especially knowing that the tracks for so long gets a huge chunk of the TV money. It's not like Rockingham was a ghost town. They weren't selling out, but the stands were about 75 to 80% full. And can you really blame the fans for not showing up to a place that's not being upgraded? Meanwhile, you got all these other racetracks that are actually doing just that, which is making the fan experience better, which helps attendance. How cool it would have been to see Rockingham get upgrades done. Imagine if they would have installed stadium lights and hosted a night race, which by the way, were becoming pretty popular in the 2000s. The place would have started selling out again, and who knows, probably gains a second date back. The track did get a second chance. I don't know if you can call it a true second chance because yeah, in 2012 and 2013 NASCAR racing is taking place at the Rock again, but it was their third tier series, the Craftsman Truck Series. Both races were compelling, but one misconception was the attendance. People claimed that the attendance was poor when that was far from the case. The grandstands for both of these races were about 80 to 85% full, which for the Truck Series is really good, especially for that time period. So if the Truck Series is filling up 80% of the seats, then it's no doubt in my mind that the Cup Series would have sold that place out. And yeah, this is the same old Rockingham that hasn't had any renovations done. But when you take away something and it's been gone for a while, people eventually want it back. Unfortunately, they didn't take the Cup Series there, and then this is when the track started to look really bad because it wasn't being kept up with. It was starting to look like North Wilkesboro. Weeds were growing all over the track, things were rusted and falling apart. We all know what happened to North Wilkesboro. It eventually got revived, but that's because it had two things going for it. Way more of an outcry from fans and people in the industry wanting the track back, The main advocate being Dale Earnhardt Jr., the second being that SMI, a huge corporation, has always owned North Wilkesboro. They just waited 20-something years to finally bring it back. With Rockingham, it's different. It's not owned by a big corporation right now. It's been owned by Rockingham Properties since 2018. There's been some positives since they took control of the place. The track has been kept up with, and what really helped recently is the North Carolina governor proposed $10 million to the Speedway and wants to see NASCAR return to the Rock. That money has already been well spent as the track underwent a repave in 2023. There's still a lot of work to be done, but that alone was already a huge step for the track. The owners of Rockingham also had conversations with NASCAR. How did those conversations go? We're not sure. But now we're in the waiting process to see if the Rock will end up back on the Cup schedule. With how the way things are at the moment, it's a 50-50 chance of it happening. Honestly, ISC or SMI will have to purchase the track and this time actually renovate the place. If that happens, then you will see it back on the NASCAR schedule instantly. I really don't want to hear from people saying that it's never coming back. They said the same thing about North Wilkesboro, and guess what? It came back. What people in NASCAR need to realize is that Rockingham is far from run down. There's catch fencing up, safer barriers are already installed, and most importantly, the track is being kept up with every day. The track in general just needs more support. People will say that adding Rockingham is just oversaturating the amount of tracks that's in the Carolina area, so how about removing a date from those tracks that's in that area? Get rid of the Roval, remove a date from Darlington, Atlanta, and other racetracks that's around that area. I know they just bought North Wilkesboro back, but instead of going there every year, how about Rockingham and North Wilkesboro rotate dates? I can see that being beneficial for both racetracks. It would just make people look more forward to both of those races since they're not being raced there every year, for the Cup Series at least. Will Rockingham be back on the Cup schedule in 2025? No, but I'm hoping something big can happen for this track ASAP so it can be ready by 2026. A great racetrack like this shouldn't be inactive. The same can be said for many racetracks like North Wilkesboro, which thankfully got revived. Texas World Speedway, which was actually still standing for a while but unfortunately got demolished. Nazareth is another, and Ontario Motor Speedway. While Rockingham isn't on life support or completely gone, it can end up being that way if NASCAR doesn't get behind this track. So please, let's bring Rockingham back. And if it ever does return, let's make sure it stays around this time.